Hello and welcome to this screencast on the key research for topic 3 sports psychology. This is Munroe Chandler, Krista Munroe Chandler et al. 2008, Playing with Confidence. What we're looking at here is the relationship between imagery use. Okay, so remember, imagery use is all about creating mental images in your mind, which will help you to cope better with sporting situations or develop self-resilience, confidence, feelings of mastery, etc. So that imagery use, self-confidence, which just mentioned, feeling good about doing a particular thing in a sporting context, and self-efficacy. Self-efficacy is basically that that feeling of thinking that you are good at something, again within a sporting context. And we're going to look at that relationship of those three things together in the context of youth soccer players. This particular piece of research is going to take place in Canada. And right, okay, so background then to start off with. Previous research have already established the effectiveness of the following. Okay, so there's going to be two different types of imagery here. And we're going to look to see how these two have, previous research has demonstrated that they've been effective. So what are the motivational general arousal, MGA imagery? That focuses on mood regulation. So if you practice MGM imagery, then what you do is you focus on regulating your mood. You try to stay calm under particular types of pressure, etc. Under, for example, taking a penalty in front of a large crowd, I've just written there. So MGA imagery has proved to be effective previously. And motivational general mastery, MGM imagery, has also been demonstrated to be effective previously as well. What is it? Well, it consists of images related to mastery, self-confidence and mental toughness. So creating images in your mind basically which push forward this idea that you are good at what you do, that you are confident, and that you are tough and you're going to hang in there. Okay, so both of those types of imagery have proved to be effective previously. However, the authors have pointed out here that the relationship between MGM imagery and self-confidence has only really been well established in adult athletes. You can see what's going to come next, can't you? Remember what the title was. So therefore, to suggest that the use of MGM imagery should be a good way for athletes to develop, maintain or reclaim their sports confidence. So it's going to be a good thing. And as I go on to say on the next slide, particularly with young people. Okay, moving on. Okay, so the aim then was to see if the relationship observed here between MGM imagery and increased self-confidence and self-efficacy for elite adult and adolescent athletes would hold true for young athletes and recreational athletes also. Okay, now just bear in mind here that there's going to be no teaching of imagery going to go on by Munroe Chandler and her gang. Basically what's going to happen here is that these children are going to either be doing this themselves naturally, or maybe it's been taught to them at some point, or whatever it happens to be. That's just something that students very often get a little bit concerned about here. They don't quite understand, where does the imagery come in? It's something that the kids have already do or have been trained in doing previously. Okay, so just bear that in mind as we go through this. We're also going to investigate the relationship between MGM imagery and self-confidence and self-efficacy as it relates specifically to soccer players aged 11 to 14. Soccer or football is a huge sport in Canada, particularly for young athletes. The Canadians were at the World Cup this year. They're not necessarily known for being amazing footballers, but it is a huge participation sport in both those countries. And the other thing about it as well is that it's very highly organised. We have what's called a house league, which is your recreational footballers, really. So these aren't your majorly competitive ones, where they're doing basically football for fun, really, focused on skills, that sort of thing. And then you have the travelling leagues as well. So you have teams whereby containing players who are more competitive, more elite, and they compete in tournaments and leagues, etc. Okay, who's the sample? We have 122 male and female soccer athletes, so that's good. We have both genders being represented here for a change. 11 to 14 were their ages. Okay, so we are talking about young athletes here, aren't we? Mean length of experience is 6 years plus, so some of them have been playing since maybe they were 6 or 7 years of age. Some of them maybe took it up a bit later, and they were recruited from both recreational and competitive soccer leagues, and this took place in Ontario in Canada. Now you might think, well, that's a small area. It's not. It's massive. There's no small areas of Canada. Huge numbers of people living there, I should imagine. Okay, so what are the three measures which are taken? Right, so basically every single one of these athletes is going to take a measure of their imagery use, okay, and that's going to measure how much and how often and what types of imagery that they use on a regular basis, if at all. We're also going to have a measure of their self-confidence, okay, and we're going to get a measure of their self-efficacy, as you'd imagine. Okay, right. How would we do this then? So there's three different self-report measures going to be used here. The first one is going to measure imagery, and it is called the Sports Imagery Questionnaire for Children, the SIQC. So wherever you see that SIQC, you know it's measuring imagery. Okay, 21 item questionnaire with statements measuring children's imagery use on a 5-point scale. Likert scale, as you can see there, between 1 and 5, and the participants were asked simply to circle the number applied most of the statement. Any high score would indicate high use of imagery or that particular type of imagery. Let's have a little look at the types of questions that you can have. So if you look on the right hand side, you can see the sort of questions. On the left hand side, you can see the type of imagery that they corresponded to. So for instance, the first one then, you had a question: I can usually control how a skill looks in my head. All right, that's obviously using imagery in some way, isn't it? What type of imagery is it? Well, in that particular case, that would be what we call cognitive specific, or CS imagery is what it's called. If you go down that maybe two more down, you can see there's a point on the right side that says I see myself being mentally strong. Well, that's what's called MGM imagery, which is the one that we're probably most interested in this particular piece of research. Okay, so you can see loads of different questions there, they're all asking about imagery, and at the end of that you're going to get a score for imagery use, and you're going to have little subscales there about the different types of imagery use that these children are naturally using as part of their competition. Okay, two other scales are going to be used. Obviously, we need to measure self-efficacy and self-confidence. For self-confidence then, we're going to use a trait sport scale. Now, this one should be pretty familiar to you if you remember back to topic one. Topic one we talked about Martins, didn't we? And the CSAI 2 scale, which was the competitive state anxiety inventory scale. Well, this one is going to be slightly modified here because that wasn't specifically for children. So the authors here, Munroe, Chandler, et al., are going to be changing that slightly and going to be making it more appropriate for children. So it is now called the CTAI2C scale. Okay, competitive trait anxiety inventory 2 for children. Okay, so that's going to be the scale that we're going to use for the kids for sports confidence. And for self-efficacy, we're going to use a soccer-specific measure, okay, which is that was available already. Didn't have to do any work on that, and it's called the SEQS, the Self-Efficacy Questionnaire for Soccer. So it's slightly different on this particular one. They give themselves scales between 0 and 100, and yeah, you can see the sort of questions there. I am confident I can work through difficult situations, etc. So we now have three different scales that we are going to measure these young people's imagery, self-confidence and self-efficacy on. Okay, all we need to do now really is to just administer the test and see what happens, and that's exactly what they did. So they gave permission from the university's research ethics board. That's fine. Coaches were sent out to letters or emails outlining the study, and we got parental consent and player assent were obtained. You know, they were young children, but they weren't like, you know, under 10 or anything like that. So, you know, they should be able to give some sort of consent, although obviously not complete consent because they are still kids. Data was collected before practice at the players' usual practice fields. Okay, so, you know, again, we're not just doing this in the home, we're doing it where they would normally be doing sport, so that's good. This was carried out over a 2-week period in mid-soccer season. Yeah, for all of them. And the participants completed also a demographics questionnaire as well. So we found out about their age, gender level, number of years playing, etc., etc. Participants were then completed the 3 measures of imagery, self-confidence and self-efficacy in that order. So they all did it in exactly the same order. And the questionnaires took a total of approximately 15 minutes to complete, which is pretty good because young people can get bored very, very quickly. Results then, dead easy this, isn't it? While all imagery subscales correlated positively and strongly with both self-efficacy and confidence, as predicted, it was the MGM scale of the SIQC which yielded the strongest positive correlation with both self-confidence and with self-efficacy. So in other words, the MGM imagery seemed to be a significant predictor of both recreational and competitive soccer players. Excellent. We found a big positive link between the use of imagery and confidence and self-efficacy. And so in conclusion, the study confirms the prediction that MGM imagery is a strong predictor of self-efficacy and self-confidence, not only in elite adult and adolescent athletes, as was already known, but also in young athletes, regardless of whether they played recreationally or competitively. So it's pretty useful, isn't it? It's not just for elite athletes and it's not just for older athletes as well. And the final little recommendation, I suppose you could say, if an athlete wants to increase his or her self-confidence or self-efficacy through the use of imagery, the best one to go for is the MGM one. Okay, the MGM function should definitely be emphasized. Pretty straightforward. Hopefully, I'm sure you'll find a bit of summary of that would help. But yeah, I hope you found that useful.